Well, welcome all of you. It's so nice to see so many familiar faces and new faces. So if you've been here before, welcome back. And if it's your first time, welcome for the first time. I'm Lauren Broomall. I'm a partner at a human-centered management consulting company called Navicet. There's me. Hi. And thanks. Actually, it's a great transition. I want to spend a special thank you to Russell, who is here this evening, my coworker, and has generously offered to be our Zoom director to help ensure everything runs smoothly. Also, if you like data analytics and or visualization, go find Russell in the breakout room. He would love to talk to you about it, I'm sure. Couple of logistics before we get into all the fun stuff. Plan for the evening. We're going to spend some time where I'll ask Coonoor some questions for a fireside chat. Russell's going to have our videos here. We're roughly going to take over your display, so you'll see us. From there, we're going to go into a little activity in breakout rooms, just 10 minutes and in pairs. It's going to be low risk and easy and fun to do. We'll bring you all back for some open Q&A so that you can ask questions to Coonoor as well. Then we're going to spend some time in networking, just open breakout rooms, move between them however you'd please. And we'll wrap up at 6:30. 2 Zoom etiquette requests. If you're not talking, please stay on mute. That helps with background noise for us. And please feel free to get some snacks, get a beverage. I know I will be drinking from a giant mason jar, as typical for me. Um, and now on to the more fun stuff. I wanted to introduce Coonoor. Coonoor Behal is our special guest here this evening, and she is the founder and CEO of MindHatch, a Seattle-based company that specializes in getting companies and organizations better results with creativity. Coonoor has lectured on improvisational leadership at George Washington University School of Business, received the prestigious GovLab Public Sector Innovation Fellowship while she was an innovation consultant at Deloitte, and was named a Starting Block Fellow in 2010. She's on the board of advisors for the Tombolo Institute at Bellevue College's Design Thinking program and on the board of directors of Street Entrepreneurs. She will be teaching design thinking at the School of Visual Concepts starting 2021. Coonoor's also served clients all over the country, including Starbucks. We have some guests here from Starbucks today, Capital One, YWCA, and SAP Concur. She's a huge fan of professional tennis. I did not know this about you, Coonoor.
Yeah, big time.
Improv comedy, and Burmese mountain dog Nika, which maybe we'll see a brief guest appearance from.
He's not here today. I'm so sad. I
Oh,
know.
okay. Well,
He's
we'll
with my
just
ex
fawn.
tonight.
We'll
Yeah.
fawn over her,
Oh,
even
I
though.
will show you pictures.
Oh,
I'm
yes, please.
on
Yes.
demand. Yeah. My camera roll is nothing but pictures of
We're
her.
going to need a picture of Nika, I'm sure, at least once through the evening. And Coonoor's book, I Quit the Life-Affirming Joy of Giving Up, will be published by New Degree Press in April 2021 and is available for pre-sale now. Russell's going to drop a link in the chat, so go check that out if you have not already. And as a transition before we get into the topic here, Coonoor, I always like to share just a personal appreciation of whoever I'm introducing. So what I appreciate about Coonoor is your presence inspires vulnerability from the people around you.
Oh, thank you. Thanks. I mean, now you've made me feel vulnerable.
So
Thank you
now that
very
I've
much.
knocked you over, let me get to the hard questions.
Disarmed me. Now the gotcha questions. Yeah.
Now the gotcha. I have a lot of surprises for you, so I hope you're ready. All right, just to get started, curious question. What is your favorite smell and why?
Oh, garlic. I love the smell of garlic. It's going to be so gross. Like, I feel like half of you are going to like nod your head. The other half of you are going to be like, this is a gross human being. I love the smell. Like, I love like chopping fresh garlic and then like my fingers, even if you wash them, like your fingers will still smell like garlic for at least the next 12 hours. And I love it. Like, I would wear garlic perfume if they made it. Like, I think it's just the best smell in the world. Yeah.
I keep discovering the oddities and similarities that you and I share, Coonoor. I'm right there with you on the garlic. Like, it's one of the few things I can buy in bulk at Costco just for myself and get
Yeah.
through without a problem.
Yeah. A second best smell would be firewood. I'm very obsessed with like fireplaces and bonfires, and I love the smell of firewood. Yeah.
So good. Well, I think we've talked about quitting before, but I don't think I've ever asked you this question. So I'm really curious. What made you decide to write a book about quitting?
Yeah. So the idea came long before I knew it would be a book or something else. I just had an idea from the early days of my company Mind Hatch when I was kind of like going on a lot of like, frankly, aimless, non-strategic coffee chats with people just to kind of talk about design thinking and talk about improv in the workplace. At this time I was living in Washington, DC. So I was going on a lot of like meet people for the first time, kind of chats at coffee
Mm,
shops and such. And I found myself like at that point I had quit 2 to 3 jobs slash careers, and I had moved around a little bit, in the country. And so I found myself being really curious when people would kind of do the inevitable. Then I worked here, then I worked here, then I lived there, then I moved to this city. I found myself being really curious of always like interrupting them and being like, tell me why. Like, why did you leave that
mm,
job? Like, why did you leave that city? And I found that it was a really, really great way to kind of just get to know someone very quickly and to really understand like what made them tick and like who they were beyond their resume. There was just a lot of like depth you could achieve really quickly, but it's asking someone like, why did you leave that thing? And you could hear a lot about what they valued. And so that was kind of my first brush with like really loving other people's quitting stories, but then also understanding how pivotal to my own life the things that I had decidedly quit had been for my life too. So I kind of I hung on to the idea for a few years and
mm,
never thought I'd do anything with it. And I was like, I'm like running a business here, like I'm not gonna like write a book, and I'm definitely not one of those people who like craves like I need a quiet space to like write for 4 hours. I'm a little bit more manic and multitasking than that. And so why it became a book was because I just got really lucky earlier this year. I learned about a publisher and a program that kind of takes you through writing a book and
mm.
makes it really demystifies it. And so I literally went from like within 1 week, it was this idea I've had for a long time that I'm never going to do anything with to, oh, hell, I'm writing a book now. So it really went 0 to 60 pretty quickly. Yeah.
And did you know that this was the book you were going to write when you started the program, or did it sort of surface like, here are some things I could write about? You're like, I've got to go with this idea, and this is the program for it.
I knew this is the idea. And weirdly enough, I had the title before I even knew about this program. before I like decided to write it, I like woke up in the middle of the night some night and I was like, that would be a cool title. And I jotted it down so I wouldn't forget it. And because I thought, oh, maybe it could be a podcast, maybe it could be a blog, maybe it could be blah blah blah, and I get kind of
Hmm.
differing kind of like excited ideas from people when I shared the idea with them through the years. And so I didn't quite know what it would be, but it definitely was kind of stuck in my head for so many years that it needed to get out. So I'm grateful that it's getting out and the book is the format for it. Yeah.
Yeah, that's awesome. Thanks for sharing too. The flash of inspiration, like you got the value prop and the promise right out of the way, right in the title. It's
Yeah.
very, it's there, which I love. Um, I'm curious, when you started writing this, do you feel like was this connected to your work, or did this feel like separate or extra? Because you've done a bunch of work in innovation and consulting and have
um,
your own business.
mhm. I've had a lot of time, like I say, I started writing the book in June. I've had a lot of
Mm,
time to kind of contemplate that. And the the full answer is yes and no. The no part is that it was always kind of just like a personal passion project. And I didn't really think of it at the beginning as part of Mind Hatch or part of my work in innovation and design thinking at all. But I think the more I've been asked that question and the more that I'm in the writing of it, there's definitely like connective tissue around why someone like me, like 10 years ago fell in love with design thinking. And then also why someone like me in the past 10 years fell in love with other people's quitting stories, and
mm,
so there's a reason why I am attracted to both. And I think a lot of it comes around to kind of like a lot of mindsets around like having better mindsets around failure, around productive failure, progress, rapid iteration. I think all these things like we as design thinkers kind of know are really helpful in other parts of our lives as well. It's really like a way of thinking. I mean, it's right there in the name, right? It's a way of thinking. So it can be applied in so many different realms. And, would this be a good time to kind of show like
I was
something
just
I'm like
thinking that.
mocking up? I wonder if that might be a bit clear. Like what, so Russell, do you have am I able to share my screen? Should I do it or would Russell do it?
I think
Either
you're
one's
allowed to.
fine. Yeah, you should
I
have
can do it?
permissions too. I have
Yeah,
it
yeah.
pulled up
Then
if
you
you'd
can
Oh,
like to.
sweet.
drive.
Okay, cool.
Yeah.
Awesome. Let me go ahead and pull this up. Because as I've been asked this question, I definitely kind of formulating like what that connective tissue is, and so the book is definitely a collection of stories. And sorry, bear with me while my computer wants to think about bringing up what I want to bring up.
Oh yeah, we have it up too. Coonoor, no
Okay.
worries.
No,
If you,
here, I got
Russell, do
it.
you want to do the? Okay.
Sure.
So the book is a collection of stories of people and the things that they've quit in their lives. And it certainly, spans quitting jobs and careers. It spans quitting people and relationships, a lot of different things in life that one can quit and be the better off for it. And so one thing that kind of came to mind, so what you're looking at here right now is something that a lot of us have probably seen before. It's a very simplistic thing I use in my design thinking 101 classes to basically show a class that like, hey, you have spent all of 10 minutes practice talking to a customer. So how kind of polished and perfect do you think your prototype should be right now? It's all to kind of, portray this mindset of like imperfection and kind of only having your prototype be as polished and perfect and as highly resourced as is commensurate with how much you have learned about your customers, right? So this is kind of like the XY axis that I share to kind of, visualize that of like, where should we be aiming today with our like measly 10-minute interviews that we practiced on, like, yeah, you're going to be using construction paper and tape and glue and like, arts and crafts level of prototyping materials. Now this is something that I've been using for years, and it kind of dawned on me through talking with like 30 to 35 people for my book and hearing their stories that there's a kind of a similar corollary to quitting, and what I was learning from the people that I talked to, as well as my own quitting stories, like everything I quit from age 19 to like last week, kind of followed this model where like there are a lot of different types of quits. I realized like there's definitely kind of like, oh, I'm going to just make a little pivot. Like maybe in a job, what that looks like is I'm going to like take a different project or go to a different team, but I'm not going to like blow up my world, and then there was this phrase that I heard from a lot of people I interviewed called this thing was no longer serving me, and that was kind of when they figured out that like, oh, this may have not been the right choice for me. I need to make a change. And maybe when you realize it's not serving you, you make kind of like a harder type of change, like a pivot, right? Maybe you leave that job or something like that. But then there's this other kind of degree of like, wow, this choice that I made, I'm discovering now violates my values and my core beliefs, and that's kind of when I think you should have the security in yourself and the confidence in yourself to make that kind of hard quit, and just like blow it all up if you need to, right? And don't look back. So I was really kind of seeing this corollary between like knowledge of yourself and kind of obviously knowing that something violates your values presupposes that you know what your values are, right? And that you have that knowledge of yourself and that confidence in yourself. So that knowledge of self can correlate with like the resolution of quit that you might make as well. And so this is something I'm kind of like toying with in my mind, about trying to kind of really articulate like how quitting can relate to like innovation work. And so this is kind of like a small piece of that. Yeah.
Thank you. I appreciate you sharing that. I have two follow-up questions.
Please, yeah.
One is, what did you quit last week, if you're willing to share?
Oh, my divorce is legal as of like 2 days ago. Yeah.
Quit a marriage. It's done.
Yeah, it's great. Yeah. Highly recommend it.
Well, yeah, I think congratulations based off of the smiling and it being a celebratory event.
Yeah. 5 out of 5 stars. Yeah.
Thank you for sharing. The other thing that made me think about was what role courage has in quitting. Does it always require courage, or is that sort of another graph with another?
I try to limit the graphs. I think it's always dangerous to over chart the human experience. But and my book definitely is like individual people's stories that I'm
Mm,
telling, like mixed in with like personal narrative of my own and from my own life. And so I'm reluctant to overgeneralize, like
mhm,
based on what I heard from people, because the one thing that I learned is that like the act of quitting and the decision to quit is so unique and so individualistic. So
mm,
I'll tell you one example. I just talked to someone for her podcast like a couple weeks ago, and we learned like my one really bad quit in life was when I was 19. I took an improv class, went to the first one, hated it, never went back, always
mhm.
had regret over it. The person I was talking to had the exact same experience. She also joined an improv class in college and quit it. And
Yeah.
it was the best thing she ever did in her life, you know? And so we both like quit the exact same thing, but it had profoundly different effects, on our lives and our conceptions of who we were. Because me quitting that was regretful. It kind of violated what I didn't know as yet was a value that I had. But for her, it like really matched a value that she had, right?
Mm,
So it's very individual. So I'm reluctant to kind of overgeneralize. But I think a real common thread in the stories that I tell in the book is that most people needed time or whatever it might have been to get the courage to make the
mhm,
quit. And so there's some really compelling things in there around what got people to that point. What was that like moment or series of moments that like really showed them that like, oh, I can't do this anymore. What was the straw that broke the camel's back, and
mhm.
so for very few people was it impulsive. It was this kind of summoning and gathering up of courage, but also frankly information, like information about
Yeah.
what was going on, information about themselves so that they could make like an informed decision.
Yeah, well, I appreciate that. I was just as you were showing the graph thinking about how doing something new and innovative requires some courage, and it occurred to me, well, I wonder if that's true for quitting then as well.
Hmm.
The role of courage there. That's also reminds me that I neglected at the beginning to say that this meetup we explore the intersection of design and other things. In case you haven't caught on with us by this point, or you're a returner and you already know this, quitting's a topic today. Next time we'll talk about something else.
Yeah.
So thanks for helping me make those connections as well,
Yeah.
Canoor. I think
Yeah.
that's one of the really interesting explorations is to go deep and talk about the topic and how it relates to design thinking. And we are
Yeah.
just so spoiled having you here today as a design practitioner,
Oh,
as
good.
well as in depth on this topic as an author.
I'm the spoiled one. Another thing comes to mind in terms of relating it to my work as a design strategist and design researcher, and this is
Mm,
like that topic of risk. So you
mm,
mentioned the word courage, right? And so like, um, there's definitely a lot that comes up in the book around like cultural values and like stigma and shame around quitting.
tell me
Right.
more.
And so, like, quitting is bad. Like, we all grew up with like the quitters never win kind of like garbage, like if you have that stitched on a pillow, throw it out. Um, and it's very like puritanical work ethic. It's very, even though it exists in other cultures that I learned in my book, which is
Mm,
pretty interesting. But I think this idea of like of managing risk, right? I mean, I write in the introduction of the book that like we've been fooled by our society, our culture, our parents, everyone, that to stay static, to stay still, to keep doing the same thing, to participate in status quo is less risky than making the choice to do
mm,
something else, right? And sometimes the choice to do something else means you have to quit that thing before, right? But we've been told that like to make a move is inherently riskier, but like we don't know that, And so I found myself over the years, even when I was
mm.
like counseling people on career changes, like finding myself telling them, well, it's a risk if you do, and it's a risk if you don't. But there's
Yes.
no telling that staying is any less risky than leaving, And so this idea that like not quitting is also a choice, right? And so I bring up the topic of risk because that is definitely comes up a lot when I'm like working with clients, to kind of like coach them into like what a productive risk is versus, like just like getting them comfortable with discomfort and getting them comfortable with uncertainty and not knowing everything, and kind of showing them that this method actually is like a de-risker, and so and that frankly, isn't it more risky to just keep doing what you've been doing for like 20 years and not change, and so
Yeah.
so I think that's a little bit of that additional kind of connective tissue between like why both these things like, were topics that I would be drawn to. Yeah.
Yeah, yeah, and I think that makes a lot of sense too. Kind of the myth that, well, it's a known quantity, so if I just stay where I am, I know what's going to
Yeah.
happen. That you could escape risk entirely, but it's more about what I sense and what you're saying too is that it's more about being thoughtful or intentional about how you're choosing the risks and
Yeah.
assessing whether doing nothing is more or less riskier. Because I think, yeah, what you're talking about, I've certainly experienced as sort of the cultural norm. I remember the first time I thought about quitting, I was like, I just got to
Mm,
put my head down and keep going. And thankfully, I had lovely people in my life that were like,
yeah.
if you have a sinking feeling of dread going to work or in a relationship or something else, maybe quitting's a great idea.
Yeah. Yeah,
But
definitely.
that's unusual. And I'm curious if you have thoughts around the kind of the stigma of quitting, because I think that's an unusual experience for me to have had someone to encourage me to quit.
Yeah. Yeah, I definitely have thoughts around it. Like I'm I'm not a fan of the puritanical work ethic. I'm not a fan of my joke since I was like a teenager was like, oh, America should have oppressed the pilgrims out of North America just like Europe did. Cause like then maybe we'd have healthcare and social welfare policies and, actual vacation days, in this country.
Yeah.
But I'm born and raised in America, so I'm definitely like, not immune to like that kind of cultural value that we put on work, and so definitely I think the puritanical work ethic comes to mind. But it was interesting because like a lot some of the people I spoke to were like from I spoke to one person who was from Pakistan. I spoke to one woman who is Anglo-Nigerian American, and she quit being a doctor. And it
Wow.
was really it's interesting to hear that like this ideas around perfectionism appear across cultures, right? And that
Mm,
pressure to achieve, that pressure to be perfect, that pressure to not take risk seems to exist in places that didn't even, have the, misfortune of being founded by pilgrims, um, so it seems to be
yeah.
pretty universal, right? Like the stigma and the shame around quitting, and so that
Fascinating.
was really interesting to learn where I might have thought before I started the book that it was a uniquely American thing. What's interesting, I say that because the Nigerian woman I spoke to,
Hmm.
her family's whole take about being anti-quitting was quitting's what Americans do. Yeah.
Interesting.
And it's this like privilege. Like being able to quit
Mm,
is like a privilege, or a sign of weakness. It can be both, right? And so
mhm.
yeah. So it's interesting. And some of the stories in my book definitely explore this idea of quitting as a privilege, right? And
Yep.
but it also sometimes makes you wonder why the people who have the privilege to do so still don't, right? And that's where the stigma and the shame comes into play. Yeah.
Yeah, yeah. You mentioned another a word in there too that I'd love to unpack around perfectionism,
Mm.
and I'm curious to hear your thoughts on this too. Is it? I mean, surely it can't be as simple as, well, if I want to be a great tennis player, I need to not quit practicing tennis. Like there's more to it than that, I
Yeah.
suspect.
Yeah. Yeah. Well, okay. So I love tennis. Thank you for bringing that back. I mean, I
I,
think it's also
I've
it's so
never tried.
individual, right? I mean, so the Williams sisters are famous for doing it their own way when they were young. Like their dad did not put them into junior tennis, did not put them
Mm.
into all like the predictable stepping blocks that a youth tennis player goes through en route to becoming a professional, and look at them now. And
Yeah.
so I think it kind of just goes to show that there is not like one path, right? Like life is incredibly nonlinear no matter what you try to wrest control over.
Mm.
So yeah, I'm not sure if that answered your question, but maybe I missed
Uh,
the
No, I
core.
love it. I sprinkled in the distraction of tennis in there. Although
Nice. I took the
I have
bait.
not tried.
I
I,
took the bait. Yeah.
You took the bait. What I'm thinking about is, I can imagine one path, which is the reason quitting is bad and the role of perfectionism is like, I'm never going to get great at something if I just give it
Yeah.
up early. But I sense then
Mhm.
think that's probably an oversimplification. So I'm curious if you have thoughts about sort of the role perfectionism plays in quitting or not quitting.
Yeah, I think it plays a huge role. The vast majority of the people I spoke to and the things that they quit proclaim themselves to be former perfectionists or recovering perfectionists, and they themselves really stitch the two together, like for me, and I think that's the thing, like having been a perfectionist myself in the past. I mean, that was very much about why I quit that improv class when I was 19, because I was
Mhm.
like used to being good at stuff and didn't want to discover I was bad at something. But like I think like for those of us who have experienced perfectionism, and sometimes it's like we're just used to like living our lives for other people. Like we're used to kind of doing the right thing. We're used to kind
Mm.
of like trying to be good at everything, but not really questioning why, right? And so I think that's kind of a common thread. And then something kind of like pierces that veil for people, and they're like, wait, I can make a choice, and
Yeah.
and I can make a choice that's good for me, not for my family, or not worry about what my extended relatives will think, or not worry about being looked up to by my cousins, something like that. So perfectionism definitely comes up a lot. And I think for a lot of the people I spoke to for the book, the stories that they told me were most often about their first big quit in their life.
Mm, mhm.
And they all say that like once they had that first big quit, it just got easier and easier and easier. And they like wanted to quit everything. They just felt so like empowered and confident to kind of like shed the other things in their lives that were no longer serving them. And so it kind
Yeah.
of gave them that, they gave themselves that permission to like not be perfect. And like once they had a taste of it, like they wanted more. Yeah.
Fascinating. Yeah, like strengthening any muscle, right? I guess the first time
Yeah.
you do it, maybe is the hardest, or it makes it easier to kind of
Yeah.
practice from there.
Yeah. And they
That's
realized that like, oh wow, like it I didn't die. Like it wasn't that bad.
yeah,
Yeah, the risk
yeah.
is way less than I thought it was. Yeah. Mhm.
That's reminding me too that I feel like this is a Brene Brown quote, or in one of her books too, that perfectionism is a form of self-shame. That like if we can be
Ah,
perfect, that we can
interesting.
avoid the consequence of not being perfect and being hurt. It's
Yeah,
something like that. That's not the direct quote. That's what I took from it
that's
though.
interesting. Well, one of the people I talked to for my book also drew a direct line between perfectionism and white supremacy culture,
Oh,
which I thought was
say
interesting. I
more.
want
Yeah.
to like learn more about that, but yeah, she drew a direct connection to that and like, white supremacy. Yeah. Mhm.
Fascinating.
Yeah. Mhm.
Um, I'm wondering if you have thoughts about what contributes or when or who decides when quitting's a failure or a triumph. Like you gave an example of two people, you and someone else quitting the same thing. And in
Yeah.
one case, like this was not a great outcome. In the other case, it clearly
Yeah.
was.
It's so individual, just to kind of like say that again, it is so individual. I think that's where that knowledge of yourself and what your values are
Mhm.
becomes so important, and it's one of those things where like when I was 19, I made the wrong decision and felt bad for it. But I also forgive myself because like I was 19, like I didn't know who I was or what I stood for. All I knew was
Yeah.
I took this action and it made me feel bad for 8 years. And so then 8 years later, I corrected it and I started doing improv and,
Mhm.
it's all she wrote. I've been doing it for 10 years now, so
Yeah.
I unquit my quit. Um, but so it is so just individual, and so but in that 8 years, I kind of like learned more about myself. I like quit a couple jobs. I learned what I wanted in my life and what I valued,
Mm.
so it was an easy unquit. So yeah, I just go back to that like knowledge of yourself and what you stand for, what trade-offs you're willing to put up with and not willing to put up with, and that's to each his own, right? You
Mhm.
can't back to like the not being able to overgeneralize.
Yeah.
It's like my path is not your path, nor should it be. It's just a matter of like getting those life experiences, those little mini experiments, if you will, to kind of continuously learn about what you want.
Yeah, I love that, and what I take from that too is that I get to decide when my quitting's a triumph or a failure, and that it's
Yeah.
gonna look and feel different for each person, and that regardless of the social pressures of celebrating a quit or stigmatizing a quit, that,
Mhm.
we're sort of the only ones to know if it's the right thing for ourselves.
Yeah, definitely. I mean, when I quit improv at 19, I felt shame, but it wasn't because I quit. It was, it was like I felt shame because I knew I quit for the wrong reasons, And
Mm,
so,
mhm.
yeah, for sure.
You brought up another thing that I love too, which is, quitting is not permanent. You can unquit something too, which is what
Yeah,
you're sharing.
totally. Yeah, it doesn't have to be, In fact, a couple of people I spoke to for the book, like they they especially felt their quit was like a good successful quit
Mm,
precisely because of how they quit. It was in the how rather
interesting.
than like the what for them. And
Yeah.
that's what made them proud about it, right? And so for a few of those same people, what was important to them was that like, oh, I left this, I quit this
Mhm.
with dignity and integrity, and I left it such that if I ever wanted to have a redo, it would be possible. So for some people, that really they value that, right? And then some other people, like one woman I was put in touch with, the first thing I saw her post on Facebook was burn it all down. know, like burn all the bridges, and so that is her take on quitting, and so it's really kind of just what matches your beliefs and your values. Yeah.
Yeah, I love that. There's
Mhm.
something interesting there too around I feel like, um, I was gonna ask you how quitting opens new possibilities, but in your answer, I feel like you addressed something that hadn't occurred to
Mhm.
me, that the process of quitting itself can be a moment of growth, and that in
Yeah.
itself is a possibility. That's really
Yeah,
neat.
definitely. Yeah.
I would love to hear more about the burning the bridges approach
Yeah.
too.
Yeah.
As this is too
I
good
have a
not to
feeling that
follow
story
there.
is gonna make it into the book. Yeah, into the final version. Yeah, yeah.
So
Um,
for some, like what, why, for some, when is that a really good idea to burn the
again, like
bridges?
I can't say when it's a good idea. Like I can't tell you that, right?
When was it good for this person, or why did they think that was a good idea? Do you think?
Uh, I think it was like a stylistic choice for them. It was
Mm,
like for them. So for them, and I've been in this position before too. For them, it was really important that her superiors knew why she was quitting.
mm,
That it wasn't just like that. It couldn't just be like dismissed as like normal turnover or blah blah blah. And I think there was probably a little bit of vengeance in there too. Like she wanted to kind of like slip away and like leave someone else holding the bag who
mm.
like deserved to be holding the bag. And so yeah, and I
Splitting up the
talking to
pieces.
her, I was like envious, man, because like the first job I quit, like, oof, I should have burned all the bridges. I should have. It was just like, yeah. But again, I didn't know myself at that time. So
Yeah. I love that. And we will just in a few minutes move to an activity where we'll do some self-discovery about how those personal values I think reflect quitting. I did want to ask just in our last few minutes before we transition to how do you think quitting opens up new possibilities?
yeah, I think for the stories I tell in the book, it's definitely that like veil being lifted and like, oh my gosh,
Mm,
I did this once and I survived. Not only did I survive, but these people like kind of thrived. And so then it becomes like, oh, I can do this again and again. This is in my power, right? Like this is a tool that I have to really refine and scope my life, and turn it into what I want it to be. And so and that's kind of part of what my goal with the book is that we just really kind of rethink quitting and quitters and like
mm,
remove some of the stigma and shame that is from it. Like every time I've quit something, it has been in the pursuit of progress and forward momentum, like not
yeah.
not like the absence of something, right? In a life. And so opening up new possibilities, I think, like these people I speak to, like they say, like if I hadn't done that, I wouldn't have met these people or had these
Mm,
experiences, or I wouldn't have ended up here, or all these other good things kind of came about because they made that singular choice.
mm-hmm.
And so it opened up more space in their lives for more things that were going to fit their values and what they wanted. So a lot of people on their own kind of brought up this idea of it opened up so much more space in my life for the things that I wanted because I wasn't wasting space on things that I knew weren't serving me very well.
Yeah, I love that. And it calls to me as a self-identified serial quitter. I
Nice.
bounced very quickly between roles, particularly early in my career. But I did always feel like I was moving. I had the privilege of going towards something instead of having to leave something behind. I had
Yeah.
fairly mundane and positive experiences for most of the things that I
Mhm.
was leaving, which I think I do feel very lucky for. That's
Yeah.
not the case for everybody, of course.
Mhm.
Um, well, thank you, Knorr. I feel like that's a good transition into this short exercise around how personal values connect with
No,
quitting,
Russell wants to
not
know what you
quitting.
quit.
What did I? Oh, are these directions for activity, Russell?
I think it's
Yes,
in
sorry,
the chat.
they snuck in a little early.
Okay, I was like,
Oh,
Russell knows
sorry,
all the
Russell.
things I've quit.
Sorry, Russell. I thought you were asking Laura.
I am curious, but we'll save that for the Q&A.
Yeah, we'll save that for
Awesome.
a Q&A. So
Awesome. Great.
there's directions in there. We're going to take just 10 minutes to do this. This is a tool provided by Knorr. So thank you, Knorr, for generously giving us a
Awesome.
sneak peek. This is in the book, I think.
Yeah, it may be in the book. I'm not sure as yet. Or it might just be kind of like something that becomes part of like events like this. But I am putting together like an I quit kind of like workbook. And so the activity you all be going through is really a very condensed kind of version of like actually the interviews that I did with the subjects in my book to gather their quitting stories. So
Awesome.